Good afternoon, Rotarians, guests, and those who have joined us today by Zoom. Welcome to the January 20th meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. I am Jean West, owner of Faces West Productions, president of the club, and a Paul Harris Fellow. And now to provide our invocation is our Vice President, Ken Grossman, owner of Executive Image, Custom Clothier, and the Paul Harris Fellow.
Thank you, President Jean. Please join me in prayer. Dear God, you've given most of mankind a strong desire to do good, to be honest, to serve others, and to faithfully fulfill their obligations to their neighbors. Help us as Rotarians and humans to do good. Help us as Rotarians and humans to be honest and ethical in all our dealings. Help us as Rotarians and humans to serve others. And help us as Rotarians and humans to faithfully fulfill our obligations as neighbors to our community, our nation, and the world. Amen.
Thank you, Vice President Grossman. And now to lead us in the pledge of four-way test is Jay Mallory, Executive Vice President of Marketing and Development for Image Quest, Paul Harris Fellow, Chair of our Membership Development, Engagement, and Emerging Leaders Committee, as well as an incoming board director.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under indivisible with liberty and justice for all.
And now the four-way test.
Is it true? Is it fair to all?
Thank you, Jane. You may be seated, Rotarian. It is always our pleasure to welcome guests. Rotarians, please take this time to approach the microphone there. Introduce yourself first, and then your guests. And guests, please stand to be recognized when the name is called.
President Jean, my guest today is Lauren Hayes, and she's the Executive Director at Dayspring.
Welcome. Welcome, Lauren. If you want to know more about Rotary, you have a Rotary session, and he's your host right here. He can tell you everything there is to know after the meeting. And we are always pleased to highlight our Rotarians in the spotlight. Corporate member Fifth Third Bank is investing $25,000 in One West's Business Accelerator, the Plan Room, which provides minority business owners with training, mentoring, and networking opportunities. So kudos to Fifth Third Bank and their member Kim Hallmeyer and the team at Fifth Third. Congratulations. What a wonderful day. Welcome, our Rotarians, to live this four-way test all the way through. Okay, now it's time for the Cajun culture class. Drum roll. In 1803, the United States paid France for the Louisiana Territory, which is 828,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River. The lands acquired stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. How much did the United States pay for the Louisiana Purchase? What is it? 15 million. $15 million. 13 states were carved from the Louisiana Territory. The Louisiana Purchase nearly doubled the size of the United States. So if any of you live in any of your honorary vacations, so there you go. Okay, I would like to now invite Casey Meyer, President of Waterfront Botanical Gardens, and member of the Speakers Committee, to the stage to introduce today's speaker.
For almost 30 years, Chris Goode has pioneered technology that merges big data with meteorology and remote sensing, a lifelong passion culminating in the launch of Climavision, a global game changer in ClimateTech. Did I just get buzzed? After decades in weather tech, Chris knew intimately the value and limitations of weather data networks. Climavision addresses this problem, expanding access to high integrity weather information through strategic partnerships and $100 million strategic investment from TPG's The Rise Fund. Goode and his team are alleviating the burden of expensive weather infrastructure and rolling out a proprietary network of radio-occultation satellites and ground-based sensors to mitigate the risks of increasingly volatile weather. Before Climavision, Goode leveraged weather data to serve industries such as aviation, energy, media, insurance, defense, and international governments. As the CEO for the world's leading manufacturer of weather sensors and software, and a former vice president at weather heavyweights AirDat, the Weather Channel companies, and WSI, now IBM, Goode helped craft national remote sensing networks for more than 90 countries and led the development of innovative software and data solutions that has changed the way the world sees weather data today. So what did you all do in the last 10 years? A U.S. Air Force weather veteran, Goode holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Montana. So we welcome Chris Goode.
Thank you very much, Casey. If you guys don't mind, I'm actually staying on floor level. I'll be centrally located so that those that are joining us today via Zoom, I'll stay on camera here. So Chris, is that working?
Good.
Looks good.
All good.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, all of you, for welcoming me today, especially Jean and Delene, who extended the invitation to talk with you and to share with you kind of our journey at Climavision and what we're trying to do right here in Louisville, a company that has global impact. So I wanted to start and just kind of walk through some things here. And we're here for a conversation today. It's one of my favorite quotes. Don't knock the weather. 9/10 of the people couldn't start a conversation, but didn't change once in a while. Now, obviously, I mean, walking in here today, I've already had multiple conversations that talk about the weather. First, my child's school was canceled in advance last night for the impending snowstorm, which was devastating. So we talk a lot about weather, and it can be lighthearted, but it also can be very serious. If we just look back to December, we had a very serious situation that developed in Western Kentucky, and it was devastating for a lot of families and people that I'm sure were in this room probably impacted by that in some form or fashion. So in the 20 or 25 minutes that we have today, I want to walk through really 6 areas with you, just give you a little more background about myself and the company and the genesis of what we started here. I also get a lot of questions, so I'll share the top 3 with you and address those. Walk through the problem that we're solving, who's impacted, and the solution that we're rolling out. So a brief personal history. I started an interest in weather and really was motivated to look into this because of 2 things: fear and frustration. Fear, initially, because when I was 14, I started to learn how to fly. And basically, what is a lawnmower with engines, it's called a Cessna 152. On a light breeze can affect this airplane. So as I was learning back when I was a teenager, I had a healthy fear of it and a respect of it. And then I went on, as Casey mentioned in my intro, I worked with the U.S. Air Force and weather forecasting, and that was really where I started to get into the science of weather forecasting and what goes into that. And then worked in the weather industry now for over 25 years with various companies that were all bringing something to the table with weather, but it was incomplete. And frustration that I had worked through in dealing with some of these problems was the genesis for what we started Climavision and what we're doing. We raised $100 million in June of last year to start this company right here in Louisville. We needed a lot of capital to start the business because what we are doing is rolling out real infrastructure, real metal, radars, and gaps in coverage that we have across the U.S. to go along with the space-based observations that we're collecting through a partner called Geo-Optics that's providing us upper level information, which is also critical in influencing the accuracy of models so that we don't have busted forecasts like we had this morning. So one of the questions I often get is, how did you raise $100 million? Start a company there in Louisville. Last year, the $100 million that we raised was actually more than all of the startups combined throughout the year. But as I mentioned, we needed that kind of capital because we're rolling out real infrastructure. So what was the process like? How were we able to keep it under the radar? No one knew about this. We were in stealth mode for several months for a variety of reasons, but no one knew about this until we went live with the announcement in June. So the way we went about this was, there's a couple of different ways that we navigated the space. First, I certainly did not do this on my own. I actually had to sell the concept of the business twice. The first was to a managing director at Goldman Sachs we had developed a relationship over the years. Goldman Sachs was critical in helping us kind of shop the overall needs of the business and helped us settle in on a few select investors before we ultimately chose TPG to work. Right? So I was doing this through the teeth of the pandemic. So all of the presentations that went along with these various prospective investors was done not in an audience like we have here today and in person, but through all Zoom meetings, MS Teams and so forth. So it was a very different dynamic. I had come up through businesses where relationships were developed and were really critical. It's very difficult to develop, strong relationships with depth over Zoom. So I often get asked the question on the heels of discussing the capital raise, why Louisville? And that really disappoints me as a Kentucky because I always answer that question, why not? This area is undervalued. This tri-state area that includes Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio has a lot to offer. All of you know it. You're active in the business community here, and there's a lot that Louisville offers that other places quite honestly can't. And when you look at some of the facts behind that, some of my friends over at Endeavor provided me some interesting statistics about talent access, capital access. And while I'm not accessing capital locally here in Louisville, there are a number of trends around this particular area that Kentucky's ranking as one of the top states that have seen the highest percentage gain in capital being raised and injected into startups just like ours. So in terms of the weather, we're all accustomed to seeing the various news headlines that are inundating us on a nearly daily basis right now. The fact is that there are and have been a record number of billion-dollar weather disasters globally. In fact, just last year we had, 2020, we had 50 of those, which was a record. And a lot of information to absorb here, but really the main takeaway is if you just look at this trend line, this is clear. There is a higher frequency of these types of events and the severity is on the rise. And really, this requires a change in approach to the typical or historical way of forecasting. When you look at the damages over just the last 5 years, there's been over 750 billion of damages just in the United States alone. And those damages come in the form of many different forms of weather and environmental impact, whether it's wildfires out west, whether it was the tornado outbreak that we had here in the state in December, or of course landfalling hurricanes and tropical storms. These are all on the rise in terms of frequency and severity. And when you look at the market that we serve at Climavision, it's a huge market. There are a number of industries, verticals, and businesses that are impacted by weather. Whether it's agriculture, the government is trying to protect, mitigate damage, and protect people and assets in various communities like Louisville. The insurance market, power, energy, and utilities, transportation. There's emerging markets as well, drone delivery services. All of those types of services are happening at the lower levels of the atmosphere where we have the biggest gaps in information. And locally, UPS is one of the leaders in this particular space. So, by a show of hands, who has been the victim of a bad weather forecast? If I don't see all hands go up on top, right? It's really probably the question is how many times in this week have you been? So why is that? Who remembers back in the early 2000s when HDTV was kind of on the rise, people were buying these plasma monitors. There was a big promotion around high definition. So if you were an early adopter, one of your biggest frustrations may have been, I just got this beautiful several $1,000 television, and I'm watching programming, and it looks terrible. And it looked terrible because the programming that was feeding that television was not also high definition. So until content started being produced in high def, we were disappointed. The reason I bring this up is when you think about modeling and what we do with what's called numerical weather prediction and forecast, we suffer from the same problem. We've been running spatially high resolution models for decades now. The issue is that the information that is feeding those models is not equal in resolution. And that's the problem that we're solving at Climavision. The problem is impacted further when you consider that the atmosphere is three-dimensional. So we're not forecasting for just that 2D space that we saw in that previous map. We need to think about data in terms of three dimensions, from the ground all the way up through the higher levels of the atmosphere. It's a huge math problem. But the premise to take away is, if you begin with your gaps in the understanding of the current atmosphere, you can't possibly accurately forecast what will happen in the future. So what we're doing at Climavision is filling the gaps. So you say, what are the gaps? You're probably used to seeing an image like this. This is what's called a national radar mosaic. There's 160 some odd radars that are literally mosaic together across the US. These radars are government operated, government controlled. It's called the NextRad network. Now, when you look at this picture, because it's in two dimensions, you think, we're well covered. I can see rain no matter where it's happening across the US. But the problem is, it goes back to, again, the atmosphere is in three dimensions. This particular graphic on the right shows you the specific NextRad locations where you have solid coverage down to about 1 kilometer or 1.5 kilometers. The problem is that when you start to think about it in three dimensions, 55% of the atmosphere is left undetected or unobserved by the existing network. This helps a little bit more to kind of round out that picture for you. So if you have a radar, a single radar, the further you get away from this radar, the higher the energy is in the atmosphere that is transmitted by that radar, because it's transmitting at a tilt. When you couple that with the curvature of the Earth, that means the further you get away from the radar, you're getting these gaps that occur at the lower level of the atmosphere. So we're missing critical information. Same thing happens in the upper air. Currently, the way we collect upper air information is through the launch of weather balloons. And we've been doing that for decades. It's a really good way to collect information, but it's very sparse. So our partnership and what we're doing with radio-occultation data or upper wind profiles and temperature profiles allows us to fill in gaps globally where there typically has been no information. So when you consider that the oceans cover most of the planet, that's a huge area for us to gap fill. And that's what helps us create better forecasts. So in terms of the real grunt work that we're embarking on here, beginning this year into the next 5 years across the US, we're actually rolling out radars that will be spaced in between the existing NextRad network. So these red circles, existing NextRad network, and then in the purple and light blue circles are our radars that are placed in between those to fill in the gaps. Celine, if you wouldn't mind just hitting this particular slide for me. This is a loop of our technology that's rolled out in Tyler, Texas, that is filling a gap. On the left is our radar. If you could play it one more time for me. It's higher resolution. You can see the spin up of an actual tornado that occurred in Thailand. What's on the right is the nearest NextRad or government operated radar. It completely missed the event in terms of the fact that it was an actual tornado because it's lower in resolution and the beam of energy above Tyler, Texas is over 15,000 feet. So this is just a kind of a compelling and very clear way of the impact that our proprietary network in terms of supplementing the government network will have on many communities across the country. And then we bring all of this information in. If you think about it, Numerical weather predictions, a lot like there's a lot of ingredients that are poured in. Those ingredients are mixed, and those ingredients are largely what's called observational data. And from all of those ingredients, we're able to, through a number of sophisticated ways of managing and handling and crunching the math that goes along with NWP, create a better output or forecast. So again, I kind of took you on a crash course in what we're doing at Climavision. We've got a few minutes here, and I'm happy to answer some questions. And of course, if you've got things that I haven't covered here that you're curious about, feel free to email me, or I'll share my contact information with Jean, and we can certainly follow up. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
So, Rotary can be questions. Well, we're still using weather balloons?
Absolutely. It's a backbone of the upper air observation.
Yes.
Well, I have lots of questions, so you just cut me off when you're ready. So who's the end user or customer? Who pays you guys for the data?
So all of those verticals that I walked through, whether it's insurance, transportation, the government themselves will actually be leveraging the data that we're doing, because they recognize that these gaps are critical to what they're doing. It's just that, as everyone's familiar with, the government lags behind a lot of these situations, right? So when you
Say it ain't so.
when you consider, there's an analogy that I like to use. 10 years ago, if anybody said SpaceX would be doing what they do for NASA now, people would say that's crazy.
How long will it take when we saw the blue and the green overlay? How long does that take to get that implemented?
This is about a 4.5-year rollout. You know, when it's all said and done, we'll have a little over 200 radars across the US.
And then this goes in perpetuity as a business model? Like once you have the network, what prevents someone else, or do they just say, well, since you've got it, I don't need it?
You mean in terms of
Competition saying like, oh, we can do better than Climavision.
Well, to be honest with you, part of the strategy about why this was so quiet and no one knew about it until June was because we had been working for the prior 18 months on solidifying sites for these radars. So we built a moat and we took an early mover advantage. Once they're up and running, it would be difficult for someone to come in and try to build a model around being redundant in terms of what we're doing as it relates to that.
So you will have a monopoly.
But we don't have a monopoly because it's just
Dirty
one
money.
element, but we're a supplement to the government, and there's others that can play in the occultation realm in the coming years for certain. But in terms of the supplemental radar network, I don't feel like there'll be a lot of new entrants in that space.
And will you guys ever go out west? I saw that the map kind of concludes, and that'll be
We will.
phase 3.
We will. Just for conciseness today, though, the first 2 phases are what we're focused on right now. But there are gaps all over the US.
So is there any research that is looking at how to impact weather, change it? I mean, we are seeing these huge drastic weather events. Is there any research looking at that? Like how, you know, for instance, heating clouds, it's gonna get rain, it's gonna go drought areas.
Right.
Yeah.
There's absolutely, there are some that are engaged in that type of thing. We are not. Mother Nature is very difficult to control. And while I'm happy for others to look into those areas, we're focused on lead time, right? I mean, we can't change these events, but what we can do is provide more lead time in order for these industries and for the government to help the public prepare for their occurrence. I mean, right now, that's the biggest problem is that when you look at a tornadic situation, you're lucky if you have minutes. And that's what we want to improve upon. But there's so many different elements to weather that we can improve on. Flash flooding is a big problem, right? So the supplemental radar network is going to help us be much more accurate in terms of how much precipitation will fall.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Hey, Charlie, can you go to the microphone so that you can?
They can hear me.
I got I was saying, I should have learned this in high school, but how come, what happens when the salt water comes from the ocean, goes up in the atmosphere, and when it hits my backyard, it's fresh water?
So there's a desalinization process that happens in that whole process that extracts the salinity from the water. It's a great question. I haven't focused on that one, but that's essentially what happens. That process of evaporation removes the salinity.
Okay, one last question.
I won't speak that loudly, so I'll come to the microphone. So, this isn't directly to do with your project, but I wonder what your thoughts are. I mean, it does seem like the weather's changing, there's more disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, all sorts of things. What are your thoughts on climate change and global warming?
So my thoughts are the climate is changing, that is indisputable. I tend not to get into the arguments about the cause of that. As somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, I think it's really important to remember that, of course, we should do whatever we can to control our carbon footprint as a human population. But be mindful of the fact we've only been keeping solid weather records for a little over 100 years. The planet's been around a lot longer. So all I will say as a scientist is that we endeavor to figure these things out and to understand them. But I think it's arrogant to say that we, in all cases, understand why things are happening in totality. And I think that's just going to be a forever long pursuit for us to understand Mother Nature and how it's all fit together.
All right, thank you, Chris, thank you very much. Oh, Tom,
Oh, wow.
last question? Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I'm reminded now, Delaney saw you at Venture Connectors, and you have raised money, and in your presentation, you mentioned that, you mentioned some positive things about raising capital in Louisville. Can you say a little bit more about that? Is it improving, and is there a shortfall? What, if you have any thoughts on what to make it better? If you feel like you can address that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to the extent that I can address it, I certainly will. The important point to realize is that I didn't raise the capital locally. The size of the capital investment that we required me to look outside of that sphere, if you will. But I can tell you, after having been kind of immersed into the entrepreneurial community here in Louisville, that things are improving. We have our office over at the Logic workspace off of East Market. And within that building alone, you have a number of companies that are contributing to the startup community. And as I mentioned, some of my colleagues at the Endeavor Group, they're finding that there's a lot of sources of capital that are here in the what they call the flyover region. And there's a lot of appeal, I think, for this area. And it's not just about New York or the West Coast anymore. I think it's definitely on the rise.
Thank you, Gabe. You may remember that we had Jody Miles. She was here to share her climate science update, the health of our home presentation last fall, and because of technical issues, we were not able to properly show her slides. So many people were interested in this topic, and happy to announce that she is offering a special opportunity to our members to attend the presentation via Zoom for free. And that's Saturday, February 5th from 9:30 to 11. And information will be in today's follow-up email regarding how to register. Now, I want to invite Denise Sears, Club Director, Chair of the International Service Committee, to the podium for a special update from our Community Impact Committee.
Denise, you prefer to use that or I would prefer to use that? Do you want- Can I just click okay. I do, because I'm always like so short. I'm the.
All right, yeah, actually, Chris, I probably don't even have to stand down there, they'll be in the video camera, right?
You're good.
Okay, so this is kind of like the Grammys, it's like, a lot of people watching on TV and, enough people for when the camera pans, it looks like someone's there. So back in 2020, after the Breonna Taylor killing, there was a lot of unrest in our city. And a committee that we had, Community Impact Committee, led by Luke Schmidt, convened. There was a lot of conversation and interest by community members to address what can we do? What can we do to make a difference? But very smartly, they recognized that they needed, that they knew what they didn't know, and that they needed to convene some speakers to educate themselves. So we did 2 full days of speakers. I don't remember, what it was like 20 speakers, Luke? And it covered a myriad of subjects, from social justice to education to policing to housing. And the committee members dedicated 2 full Saturdays to listening to these speakers and having an opportunity to engage. We had Metro Council President David James. We had Nikki Lanier, who at the time was with the Federal Reserve. We had people from NCAAP, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And including some residents that I had known from my time working in West Louisville, a single mom, a violence interrupter. So it wasn't just all kind of talking heads. It was real people from the community also. And what was really fascinating and somewhat disturbing was that there was a theme that wove through every presentation. So no matter whether they were talking about the judicial system, education, housing always came up. Is anybody moving the slides for me?
I can do it, or you can do it. Clicker.
Can I just yell to you, Celine? Okay, all right. Home ownership, which the majority of us in this room take for granted, builds wealth. Dr. Kelly McCants at Martin Healthcare said, home ownership builds wealth, which builds health. So this is something, this is not a theme that we developed. It's well known. And yet, for generations in our community, Black home ownership has been held back. Black families have not had the same opportunity as the rest of us in being able to build that family wealth. Next slide. One of the most compelling speakers that we had was Yvette Gentry, who at the time, I believe, was serving as interim chief of police. She was not at the time. She was finishing up. Yes, but she also filled in a
This was before.
before, thank you, okay. She did that after speaking to us, she filled in that position. This was her statement, her story. She said, I had 2 grandfathers, one was white and one was Black. They both fought in World War II, they both survived, they both came home. My white grandfather had the opportunity to have VA benefits, and he became a homeowner. He died a homeowner. My Black grandfather, who fought in the same war, faced the same perils, and fought for our country, did not have access to the same benefits, and he died a renter. And that story, I think, really opened the eyes of a lot of our committee members that this was an area that we wanted to explore. What can we do as a club to address this? Next slide. 80% of West Louisville residents are renters, and rent is usually twice what the mortgage would be, and mortgage and taxes would be for the home that they're living in. The access to affordable capital is the barrier that they face. Next slide. Going back in history, this began back in the 30s with redlining. Redlining was a bank practice of not lending in certain areas to certain demographics. All right, so West Louisville or wherever there was predominantly Black community, banks would not lend money. They did not consider it a good investment, and therefore they didn't do it. Next slide. Redlining has been banned by law, and every banker will tell you it does still exist to a certain degree. All right, banks were not running to West Louisville to lend money for a long time. But the biggest challenge, because now the banks are going down, is the inherent mortgage qualification process. It is based on assumptions and culture that don't fit into West Louisville. So I'll give you an example. When I applied for a home mortgage, I had a credit history. I bought a car, I had a student loan, I had a credit card. If I am a single mother in West Louisville, I probably never bought a car, I don't have a car loan, I don't have a credit card, I pay my utilities and I pay my rent, but they are not factored in generating a credit score for me. So my low credit score is really a reflection of the fact that I don't have credit. So my barrier to homeownership is nothing that I've done, it's my circumstances. I don't have the same circumstances. I didn't have parents who sent me to college. I didn't have an entry-level job where I could qualify for a credit card. Many people work 2 jobs. The reality is some of their jobs may not be calculated into all of their reportable income, because that's the reality there. They're trying to make money to pay their bills, pay their childcare, and keep food on the table. Small mortgages. Banks don't really like small mortgages because their cost, their regulatory cost is the same whether they lend you $80,000 to buy a house or whether they lend you $500,000 to buy a house. Now, I ran my own business for a long time, and I will tell you from a return on investment, I'm going to get Jean her mortgage before I give you your mortgage because it just makes financial sense. And they have shareholders that they have to report to. So small mortgages are really not in an attractive investment for banks. And yet, the residents are still continuing to make their monthly rental payments and their utility payments, and they're still being shut out from being able to access the capital to become a homeowner. Let me share a quick story about one of the families that I worked with when I was in West Louisville. Charlotte was a single mom. She had 2 children. She was working a job and she was getting some tuition reimbursement and slowly working towards her bachelor's in nursing. They used to come to the food program. The kids would eat at Kids Cafe. And there was a cooking program, and Mom would always come to the cooking program. I thought, well, that's right. And so what she told me is they don't have a stove, a working stove in their rental home. And so she goes there so she can eat for free. That's why she was doing the cooking class. Her landlord lived in Ohio. So he really was not efficiently addressing getting the stove replaced. It had been a month, and she still didn't have a working stove. Her credit score was too low to qualify for a mortgage. She was locked into being a renter, locked in due to circumstances out of her control. She was working with our program to raise her credit score. They wanted her to get a credit card, so she got like a $150 credit card. In time, she was building it up, and one of the kids got hurt. She ended up at the emergency room with a bill. Bang, her credit score plummeted because that's all she had was that one credit card. So me, I will tell you, I have missed a payment once or twice, as I'm sure many people here have. It didn't tank my credit score because I had a car loan and because I had 4 credit cards. So one wasn't gonna hurt me, right? I had different circumstances than she had. And so I've been able to build wealth in my family, and yet she's working just as hard, but she's had doors closed. Next slide. All right, very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, but I am very passionate about this. What's the benefits of increasing home ownership in West Louisville? 1, it reduces poverty, it begins wealth building. They now actually can build equity and maybe even get a loan to start a business. It's proven and improves academic success of children that live in a home that is owned, that has increased home stability, housing stability. Next slide. It is well known in communities where there's a higher rate of home ownership, there is a lower crime rate, there's a sense of pride. It improves the health of the community. Home ownership and stability of housing improves health. It takes away stress, promotes a healthier, more robust economy, and it attracts outside investors to the community for all the reasons that I've just cited, because it's a more attractive place to invest. Next slide. All right, here's the other thing that attracted us to this subject is if we go down and we deliver all these different kind of programs, the impact is wonderful, but it impacts that one person. Home ownership will impact a family. Average family size is 4 individuals for generations because it's going to build wealth. So it not only impacts the family who benefits, it's going to impact those children and those children's children, just like it did for us when our grandparents became homeowners, who then our parents became homeowners, and we did. Current assistance programs, there are many out there. There's down payment assistance, home ownership education, credit counseling, building more affordable housing, but there's a missing gap. And that is looking at mortgage qualifications through a more creative lens. Not about putting people who can't afford it in a home, that would hurt them. But somebody who's been paying rent for years and their utilities for years, why can they not use that to document that they are credit worthy and capable of being a homeowner, which actually will save them money. Next slide. All right. So through hours and hours, hundreds of hours over the past year and a half, our committee, Luke and I, as well as some outside consultants, have been working on a project. And I'm just going to give you little tidbits. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to show back up next Thursday. And Luke's going to tell you actually what it is. But what I'm going to tell you is that everyone we've talked to said no one in the entire country is doing what we're proposing. We will be the first. Some people might say, how can the Rotary Club of Louisville be the first to roll this out? Well, probably 30 years ago, someone said, why doesn't Rotary try and eradicate polio? And someone probably said, well, that's a crazy idea. And look where we are. So the impossible is possible. And that's what we're going to do. We are going to change the dynamics of home ownership for families in West Louisville. So stay tuned. And Luke will bring on the show next Thursday.
Rotarians, the first sparks of the year, I sent a message to you all, thanking you for your, I get emotional, Luke. Remembering that weekend, I think we all at some point teared up. When I said to you all that we are making transformative changes for the city. This is what I'm talking about. And I want you all to be proud of it and get behind it, because it is going to change lives for generations. And again, Luke and Denise have put hours into this, and I can't tell you how much I thank you for that. Okay. Next week's meeting, IU Southeast Sanders Chair in Business, Dr. York Dufresne, will present his 2022 economic outlook. God bless him. Please scan the QR code at our table to look for the link in this afternoon's email to register, and then again, review the weekly Sparks email, if you will, read the whole email for important announcements about volunteers needed for upcoming events, as well as this week's birthday celebrations. And again, Jay Mallory has all the answers to what is Rotary. Thank you so much for coming. Do good, have fun doing it. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.